Today we are going to talk about multiplying and dividing rational numbers. So the first thing we're going to look at is how do you multiply fractions? So our first rule is that we multiply straight across, numerator times numerator, and then denominator times denominator. So as you can see in this first example, we go 3 times 2, and that gives us 6. Then we do 4 times 5, and that gives us 20. Now our second rule says to reduce if possible. So both of these two numbers right here, 6 and 20, are both able to be reduced by 2. So we're going to put divide by 2, and that will leave us 6 divided by 2 gives us 3, 20 divided by 2 gives us 10. Now let's try our own example. So we have 3/5 multiplied by 2/3. So according to our first rule, we go straight across. So we go 3 times 2, and that gives us 6. Then we go 5 times 3, and that gives us 15. Now, both of these can be divided by the same number, and that number is 3. So we do 6 divided by 3 and 15 divided by 3. So when we do that, 6 divided by 3 gives us 2. 15 divided by 3 gives us 5, and we are left with 2/5. So the next thing we're going to look at is how do you multiply a fraction with a whole number? So the rule says to put a 1 under the whole number to make it a fraction first, then you multiply straight across like we just did in the last example. So here we have our whole number, 6, and we multiply it by 2 over 7. So according to our rule, we have to put a 1 under that 6 to make it 6 over 1. Now we can multiply straight across. So 6 times 2, that gives us 12. 1 times 7, that gives us 7. Then we can reduce. So how we reduce is we do top in, bottom out. 12 is the top, 7 is the bottom. Okay, 7 goes into 12 one time. 12 minus 7 gives us 5. Then I like to teach the popcorn method. So we start here where our answer is going to be. So we go to 5 because that's the first number we cross. That to 7, back to home. So the first number we crossed goes on the top. That's 5. And the second number we cross goes on bottom. So we are left with 1 and 5 over 7. Now we're going to try our own example. So here we have 4 times 3 over 8. So the first thing we have to do is put a 1 under the whole number to make that 4 over 1. Now we can multiply straight across. Numerator times numerator, which is 4 times 3. That gives us 12. Then we can do denominator times denominator, so that's 1 times 8, and that gives us 8. Now we do our top in, bottom out. So the top number is 12, that's inside the box. And the bottom number is 8, and that goes out. 8 can go into 12 one time. We subtract 8 minus 12, and that gives us 4. Then we do my popcorn method. Start where our answer is going to be. We hit 4 first, so we know that's our top number. We come across 8 next, that's our bottom. Bring it all the way back to top. So now we are left with 1 and 4 over 8. Now we can reduce. We know that 4 and 8 can both be divided by 4. So then we are left with 1, and 4 divided by 4 is 1. 8 divided by 4 is 2. So we're left with 1 and 1/2. The next thing we're going to look at is how do you multiply decimals. So the first thing we look at is we do not line up the decimals. So if you see where I've already set it up, we did not line up the decimals here. We just put our normal multiplication problem. The second rule says you multiply as you normally would, counting the number of decimal places in the problem. So we are left with 1, 2, 3 decimal places. So we're going to put that over here inside the D, saying there's 3 decimal places. So now we can multiply regularly. Now I've already done the problem for you, so we can kind of just breeze through this. 6 times 4, that gives us 24. So we put a 4, carry the 2. 6 times 3 gives us 18. but we have 2, so that's 1920. Put a 0, carry the 2. 6 times 2 gives us 12, plus the 2 is 14. Then we can put an x for place value and take away the 6. Now we're moving on to our next number, which is 5. 5 times 4 gives us 20. So we put a 0, carry the 2. 5 times 3 gives us 15, plus the 2, which is 17. 7, carry the 1. 5 times 2 gives us 10, plus the 1 is 11. Now we have our third number, so we're going to put 2 x's for our place value. 8 times 4 gives us 32. We put the 2, we carry the 3. 8 times 3 is 24, plus the 3 is 27. So we put the 7, carry the 2. 8 times 2 is 16, plus 2 is 18. Okay, then we are going to add like normal. 4 is the only number here, so we drop it down. 0 is the only number here, so we drop it down. 4 plus 7 gives us 11, plus 2 is 13, so we put the 3 and we carry the 1. 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 plus 1 is 3, 3 plus 7 is 10, put the 0, carry the 1. 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 plus 8 gives us 10, put the 0, carry the 1. 1 plus 1 gives us 2. Now we refer back to d equals 3 up here. So that says there are 3 digits behind the decimal in the problem. So that means we have to move our decimal from here 3 decimal places to make it work. So we go 1 and a 2 and 3 right there. So our final answer would be 200.304. The next thing we're going to look at is how do you know if the answer is a positive or a negative? So we use something called MADDUDE. Now if you notice, the M and the D are underlined. So we can only use MADDUDE when we multiply for M or divide for dude. So the way we draw this is we put a circle and his eyes are minuses and his nose is a plus. So we look at our first example. I'm going to draw my MADDUDE again. We have a negative and a positive. So those are the 2 things I'm going to circle, a negative and a positive. Now what are we left with? That's right, it's a negative. So our answer here is going to be negative. Moving on to the next one, we're going to draw our MADDUDE again. So here we have a positive and a negative. So those are the 2 things I'm going to circle, a positive and a negative. And I am left with a negative. So our answer is going to be negative. Now on the last one, let's draw our MADDUDE. So the eyes are negatives, the nose is a plus. We are going to look. We have a negative with a negative. So those are the 2 things I'm going to circle. 2 negatives. Looks like he has a little mask on. So what are we left with here? That's a positive. So our answer is going to be positive. Again, I want to reiterate, you can only use MADDUDE when you are multiplying and dividing. No other time. So the next thing we're going to look at is how do you divide fractions. So the first rule is convert mixed numbers into improper fractions if there is one. The second rule, flip the second fraction and change the division symbol to multiplication. Then the last rule is follow the multiplication rules that we learned earlier. So now we're going to look at how do you divide fractions. So the first step is to convert the mixed numbers into improper fractions if there is one. So in our first example here, we do not have an improper fraction, so we can go to the second step. The second step says to flip the second fraction and change the division symbol to multiplication. So we flip the second fraction, 3 over 2 instead of 2/3, and then we change the division to multiplication. Then we keep the first fraction the same. So we learned how to multiply fractions earlier. We multiply straight across. 3 times 3 gives us 9. 5 times 2 gives us 10. So we get 9 over 10. Now we're going to move on to our second example. So we need to go back to our first rule that says convert mixed numbers into improper fractions if there is one. So in our example here, 4 2/3 is a mixed number. So the way we take a mixed number and change it into an improper fraction is we take the whole number, which is 4, and we multiply it by the denominator, which is 3. So 4 times 3, and that gives us 12. From there, we have to add the numerator, so I draw a little arrow up and put a plus. So now we have 12 plus 2, and that gives us 14. We just put it right back over the same denominator. So our first fraction is 14 over 3. We're going to finish out rewriting the problem, divided by 2/5. Now we have to go back to our second rule. Our second rule says to flip the second fraction and change the division symbol to multiplication. So let's flip that second fraction. So 5 over 2 instead of 2/5. Change the multiplication, and then we keep the same first fraction. Now we're going to follow our multiplication rules when we are dealing with fractions. So we go straight across. 14 times 5. That may be a little tricky to do in your head, so let's come up here and do it. 14 times 5. We get 20 and carry the 2. 5 times 1 is 5 plus 2 is 7. So we get 70 over 3 times 2 is 6. Now, I don't like leaving it as an improper fraction. I like converting it back into a mixed number. So we follow the rule we learned earlier, top in, bottom out. So I put 70 inside the box and 6 on the outside. 6 goes into 7 one time, and that's 6. 1 left over, we bring down our 0. 6 goes into 10 one time, that's 6. We have 4 left over. Now we do our popcorn. So we're left with 11 and 4 over 6. But 4 over 6 can be reduced. Both can be divided by 2. So we have to divide by 2, divide by 2, and that gives us 2/3. So our final answer after all that work is 11 and 2/3. The last thing we're going to look at is how do you divide decimals? So the first rule, we eliminate the decimal in the divisor if necessary, which means you'll need to change the place value of the dividend as well. The last step is to float the decimal up to your quotient. So here we're going to look at our first example, 31.773 divided by 5.1. Now I like to follow the rule first in, last out. So the first thing we see is 31.773. The last thing we see goes outside the box at 5.1. Now we have to get rid of that decimal that's outside the box in the 5.1 over here. And the way we do that is we move the decimal over one time. But what we do to the outside, we have to do to the inside as well. So move this decimal over 1. So our new problem is 51 divided by 317.73. Now, the next thing is we divide just like normal, but I'm going to go ahead and look at that last step which says float the decimal up to your quotient. Float the decimal up to your quotient. That's very important. If you forget to do it, then your answer will be wrong. So we're going to go ahead and float that decimal straight up here. That way we won't forget. Now, 51 goes into 317. I'm not exactly sure the amount of times, but I'm going to guess around 6, because I know 50 times 6 is 300. So let's try it up here. 51 times 6. 1 times 6 gives us 6. 6 times 5 gives us 30. So we get 306. I would say that's the right amount. So put a 6 here. We subtract by 306. 7 minus 6 is 1. 1 minus 0 is 1. We have our decimal. We already brought it up. Now we're going to bring down the 7. Now 51 goes into 117 2 times. and that's 102. We subtract. 7 minus 2 gives us 5. 1 minus 0 gives us 1. We bring our 3 straight down. 51 goes into 153 3 times, and that is 153 exactly. We subtract, we get 0. So our answer is 6.23. So now we're going to look at our last example, 26 divided by 2.5. So we're going to follow the same rule, first in, last out. So we're going to put 26 inside the box, 2.5 on the outside. Now we have a decimal in the outside, so we're going to have to move the decimal here. But we don't really have anywhere to move this decimal, so we're going to have to move it and add a 0. So let's rewrite that problem so it looks a little neater. So we have 25 divided by 260. So 25 goes into 2 0 times. 25 goes into 26 once, and that is 25. You get 1 left over. Bring the 0 straight down. 25 goes into 10 0 times. So we have to put a decimal now and a 0. Bring it straight down. 25 goes into 100 4 times, and that is 100. So we're left with the final answer of 10.4.